What happens when Hollywood's most notoriously private actor finally reaches his breaking point on live television? What we witnessed on The View was nothing short of explosive, as Harrison Ford, known for his calm demeanor and measured responses, completely lost his composure in a way that left the entire studio stunned into silence. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong, this was a masterclass in how not to handle a guest, and Joy Behar was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation that has everyone talking, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think really pushed Harrison over the edge. The morning started like any other at the View Studios. Harrison Ford had arrived for what was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance for his latest film. The legendary actor, now in his 80s but still commanding respect in Hollywood, had agreed to this interview as part of his media tour. What nobody expected was that this would become one of the most talked about moments in daytime television history. As the cameras rolled and the show's familiar theme music faded, the panel of hosts sat ready at their curved desk. Whoopi Goldberg offered the standard warm welcome that viewers had come to expect, but there was already an undercurrent of tension that seemed to emanate specifically from Joy Behar's direction. She had that look in her eyes, the one that regular viewers knew meant she was ready to stir the pot. "Harrison, thank you so much for being here," Whoopi began with genuine warmth. "We're so excited to talk about your new project." Harrison Ford, dressed in his characteristic casual blazer and jeans, nodded politely. "Thanks for having me," he replied in that familiar gravelly voice that had captivated audiences for decades. But before Whoopi could continue with her planned questions, Joy Behar jumped in with what would prove to be the first of many interruptions. "You know, Harrison, I have to ask, and I know our viewers are curious about this too. Why do you always seem so grumpy in interviews? I mean, you've got this reputation for being difficult with the press." The question hung in the air like a lead balloon. The other hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances, and you could practically feel the temperature in the room drop several degrees. Harrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his composure. "I wouldn't say I'm grumpy, Joy. I just prefer to keep things professional and focused on the work," Harrison responded, his tone measured but with a slight edge that anyone paying attention would have noticed. Joy, however, either didn't pick up on the warning signs or simply chose to ignore them. She leaned forward with that smirk that her critics knew all too well. "Oh, come on, Harrison. We've all seen the clips. You practically bit that reporter's head off last month when they asked about your flying. And don't even get me started on how you handled that poor interviewer who asked about Star Wars." "Those were different situations," Harrison said, his voice growing noticeably cooler. "And I think you're mischaracterizing what actually happened." Sarah Haynes, sensing the growing tension, tried to redirect the conversation. "Harrison, let's talk about your new film. The role seems really challenging and different from what we've seen you do recently." But Joy wasn't finished. In fact, she was just getting started, and what came next would prove to be the catalyst for everything that followed. "You know what I find interesting, Harrison? Here you are, this incredibly successful actor, but you seem to have such disdain for the very industry that made you famous. I mean, you've made millions from these big blockbuster franchises, and yet you act like you're above it all." The accusation was delivered with Joy's typical bluntness, but this time she had clearly crossed a line. Harrison's eyes flashed with something that went beyond mere annoyance. "This was personal now. I think you have a fundamental misunderstanding of what I do and why I do it," Harrison replied, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet tone that anyone who knew him would recognize as a warning. "I've never claimed to be above anything. I take my craft seriously, and I expect the people I work with to do the same." Joy laughed, actually laughed, in a way that came across as dismissive and condescending. "Oh, please, Harrison. Craft? You point guns and fly spaceships. It's not exactly Shakespeare." The insult hit its mark. For a man who had spent decades honing his skills, working with some of the greatest directors in cinema history, and taking on roles that challenged him both physically and emotionally, to have his life's work dismissed so casually was clearly a bridge too far. "You know what, Joy?" Harrison said, his voice rising for the first time since the interview began. "I came here today to talk about a project I'm passionate about, something I've put months of work into, and instead you want to sit here and take cheap shots at my career and my character." The studio had gone completely quiet. Even the crew members who had been moving around behind the cameras had stopped what they were doing. This was no longer an interview. This was rapidly becoming a confrontation, and everyone in the room could feel it. Whoopi tried once again to intervene. "Let's just take a step back here. And—" "No, Whoopi," Harrison interrupted, something he never would have done under normal circumstances. "I think Joy has something she wants to get off her chest, so let's hear it. Let's hear what you really think about actors and the work we do." Joy, perhaps realizing she had pushed too hard but unwilling to back down in front of millions of viewers, doubled down on her position. "Look, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You Hollywood types live in these bubbles, making these big-budget movies about nothing, and then you act like you're doing something important. Meanwhile, there are real problems in the world that need attention. And you think sitting here every day making jokes and taking cheap shots at people is somehow more important?" Harrison shot back, his composure finally beginning to crack. "At least when I do my job, I'm trying to entertain people, to give them something that might make their lives a little better for a couple of hours. What exactly are you contributing?" The attack was direct and pointed, and Joy's face flushed red with anger. She had clearly not expected Harrison to fight back with such intensity. "I'm informing people. I'm giving them news and perspective they need to make sense of the world." Harrison leaned back in his chair and gave Joy a look that could have frozen water. "Is that what you call this? Information? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks more like you're just trying to tear people down to make yourself feel better." The words hung in the air like a live grenade with the pin pulled. Joy's face went from flushed to pale in seconds, and for perhaps the first time in her career on The View, she was momentarily speechless. But Joy Behar was not someone who stayed quiet for long, especially when she felt cornered. "Excuse me?" Joy said, her voice rising to match Harrison's intensity. "I've been in this business for decades, Harrison. I was doing comedy and commentary when you were still pretending to be a carpenter between movie roles. Don't lecture me about contributing to society." Harrison's eyes narrowed dangerously. "At least when I was a carpenter, I was building something instead of just tearing things down. And for the record, I never pretended to be anything. I worked with my hands because I needed to pay the bills, something you might not understand given your privileged position here." The other hosts were now visibly uncomfortable. Sunny Hostin kept glancing between the two combatants like she was watching a tennis match, while Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Whoopi, usually the master of controlling chaos on the show, seemed unsure how to handle this unprecedented situation. "Privileged position?" Joy's voice cracked with indignation. "I worked my way up from nothing, Harrison. I started in dive comedy clubs where half the audience wanted to throw bottles at me. I earned every single thing I have." "And what exactly do you have, Joy?" Harrison shot back, his voice dripping with disdain. "A platform that you use to ambush guests and make them uncomfortable? A career built on saying outrageous things for shock value? That's your legacy?" Joy slammed her hand on the desk, causing the coffee mugs to rattle. "My legacy is speaking truth to power. My legacy is not kissing up to celebrities like some people do. I ask the questions that need to be asked." "Questions?" Harrison laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call what you've been doing here today? Because from my perspective, it looks more like a personal attack wrapped up in the pretense of journalism." Whoopi finally found her voice. "Guys, we need to dial this back a little bit. We're on live television here. And—" "No, Whoopi," Joy interrupted sharply, never taking her eyes off Harrison. "If Mr. Ford here thinks he can come on my show and insult me and my profession, then he's going to hear exactly what I think about his attitude and his arrogance. Your show?" Harrison's voice rose to a level that made everyone in the studio flinch. "Your show? Last time I checked, this was called The View, not the Joy Behar Hour. And if you think asking loaded questions designed to make your guests look bad is journalism, then you have a very warped understanding of what real journalists do." The accusation hit Joy like a physical blow. She had always prided herself on her interviewing skills, and to have them questioned so publicly and so harshly was clearly more than she could tolerate. Real journalists? Joy's voice was now shaking with rage. Real journalists, like the ones who follow you around asking about your personal life? Real journalists like the ones who dig into your relationships and your family? Maybe I should start asking about some of those topics if you want real journalism. The threat was unmistakable, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Harrison Ford had always been fiercely protective of his privacy and his family, and Joy had just crossed the most dangerous line possible. Harrison stood up slowly from his chair, his full height making him an imposing figure even in his 80s. The movement was deliberate and controlled, but there was something in his posture that suggested barely contained fury. "Are you threatening me, Joy?" Harrison's voice was now dangerously quiet, the kind of quiet that came before an explosion. "Are you actually sitting here on live television threatening to invade my family's privacy because I called you out on your unprofessional behavior?" Joy seemed to realize she had gone too far, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. "I'm just saying that if you want to play hardball, Harrison, I know how to play hardball too. This isn't some movie set where you can storm off whenever you don't like the script." "You're absolutely right," Harrison said, his voice getting louder with each word. "This isn't a movie set. On a movie set, people have respect for each other. On a movie set, people do their jobs professionally. On a movie set, when someone is clearly out of line, the director steps in and fixes the problem." He turned to look directly at the camera, addressing the audience at home. "Ladies and gentlemen, I came here today to talk about a film that I'm proud of, a film that took months of hard work from hundreds of talented people. Instead, I've been subjected to what can only be described as a character assassination by someone who apparently thinks that bullying guests makes for good television." The studio was now in complete chaos. Producers were frantically trying to figure out whether to cut to commercial. The other hosts were whispering urgently among themselves, and the crew was frozen in place, unsure whether to keep filming or not. Joy, realizing that Harrison had effectively turned the entire situation against her, made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Oh. So now I'm the bully? You're the one who's been sitting there insulting me and my work for the last 10 minutes. You're the one who's been acting like you're too good to be here." Harrison turned back to face Joy directly, and the look in his eyes was something that would be talked about for years afterward. "I never said I was too good to be here, Joy. What I said was that I expected to be treated with basic human decency." Apparently, that was too much to ask. Basic human decency? Joy's voice cracked as she practically screamed the words. "You want to talk about decency? You've been condescending and rude from the moment you sat down. You've acted like answering questions was beneath you." "I answered every legitimate question that was asked," Harrison replied, his voice now eerily calm in contrast to Joy's hysteria. "What I didn't do was sit here and let you use me as a punching bag for whatever personal issues you're dealing with." The accusation that Joy was taking out personal frustrations on him was the final straw. Joy's face contorted with rage as she prepared to unleash what would prove to be the most damaging response of her career. Joy leaned forward in her chair, her eyes blazing with an anger that seemed to consume all rational thought. "Personal issues? Personal issues? You want to know what my personal issue is, Harrison? My personal issue is entitled celebrities who think they can waltz in here, act like they're doing us some kind of favor, and then get offended when someone doesn't kiss their ring." Harrison's face hardened into an expression that could have been carved from stone. And there at Island, the real Joy Behar. Not the comedian, not the journalist, just someone who resents successful people and uses her platform to tear them down out of pure spite. "Spite?" Joy's voice reached a pitch that made everyone in the studio wince. "You think this is about spite? This is about accountability, Harrison. This is about not letting people like you hide behind your fame and act like you're above criticism." "Criticism?" Harrison's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Is that what you call this circus? Because real criticism involves actual knowledge of the subject. Real criticism comes from a place of wanting to understand, not from a place of wanting to destroy." Joy stood up abruptly, matching Harrison's earlier move, but where his had been controlled and deliberate, hers was erratic and desperate. "Destroy? You think I'm trying to destroy you? Harrison, you're destroying yourself right here on live television. Every word out of your mouth is proving exactly what I've been saying about your attitude." "My attitude?" Harrison's voice exploded with a fury that had been building for the entire interview. "My attitude? Joy, I have spent 40 years in this business working with some of the most talented and dedicated people on the planet. I have worked with directors who demanded excellence, with actors who pushed themselves to their limits, with crew members who gave everything they had to make something beautiful. And in all those years, through all those productions, I have never, and I mean never, encountered the level of unprofessional, vindictive behavior that you have displayed here today. The words hit Joy like a series of physical blows. Her face went white, then red, then white again, as the full weight of Harrison's condemnation sank in. But instead of backing down, she doubled down with a viciousness that shocked even her regular viewers. Unprofessional? Vindictive? Joy's voice was now shaking with rage. You know what's unprofessional, Harrison? Coming on a show and acting like you're too good to engage with the hosts. You know what's vindictive? Sitting there with that smug expression, acting like everyone else is beneath you. Harrison took a step closer to Joy's position at the desk, his presence now dominating the entire set. I have been nothing but respectful to every other person on this panel. I have answered questions, I have tried to stay focused on why I'm here, and I have maintained my composure even while being repeatedly attacked. If you see that as smugness, then that says a lot more about you than it does about me. Whoopi made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Okay, everybody needs to just take a breath here. We're going to take a commercial break and... No, Harrison said firmly, never taking his eyes off Joy. I think the audience deserves to see this through to its conclusion. They deserve to see what happens when someone with a platform uses it to bully and harass their guests. Joy's face twisted into an expression of pure fury. Bully? Harass? You arrogant piece of work. I have been doing this job for longer than some of your movie career spans. I have interviewed presidents, world leaders, Nobel Prize winners. Don't you dare stand there and lecture me about how to do my job. Then act like you know how to do it. Harrison shot back without hesitation. Because what you've done here today isn't journalism, it isn't entertainment, and it certainly isn't professional. What you've done here today is exactly the kind of toxic behavior that gives daytime television a bad name. The accusation that she was damaging the reputation of her own industry was apparently the final straw for Joy. She began gesticulating wildly, her voice reaching levels that seemed impossible for human vocal cords. Toxic? Toxic? You want to see toxic, Harrison? Toxic is coming on someone else's show and acting like you're doing them a favor. Toxic is treating the hosts like they're some kind of nuisance you have to endure. Toxic is your whole attitude from the moment you walked in here. Harrison's response was delivered with a calm that was somehow more devastating than any shout could have been. Joy, I walked in here with the same respect I show every interviewer, every journalist, every talk show host I work with. The difference is that they treat their guests with the same respect in return. They ask real questions, they listen to the answers, and they don't use their platform as a weapon to settle personal scores. Personal scores? Joy was now practically screaming. What personal score could I possibly have with you? I don't even know you. Harrison nodded slowly, as if Joy had just proven his point. Exactly. You don't know me. You don't know my work, you don't know my character, and you don't know what I stand for. But that didn't stop you from attacking me from the moment I sat down. That didn't stop you from making assumptions and hurling accusations. That didn't stop you from turning what should have been a professional interview into a personal vendetta. The other hosts sat in stunned silence as the confrontation reached its peak. Sarah Haynes looked like she might cry. Sunny Hostin was staring at her hands, and even Whoopi seemed at a loss for how to handle the situation. Joy, realizing that she was losing the battle of public opinion with every word, made one final, desperate attempt to justify her behavior. You know what, Harrison? Maybe you're right. Maybe I did come at you too hard. But you know why? Because I'm sick of celebrities who think they can coast through interviews without giving anything real. I'm sick of the fake smiles and the rehearsed answers and the pretense that everything is perfect in Hollywood. Harrison looked at Joy for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a sadness that was somehow more powerful than all the anger that had come before. Joy, if you wanted something real, all you had to do was ask real questions. If you wanted to know who I am as a person, you could have asked about my passions, my hopes, the things that drive me to keep working at my age. Instead, you chose to attack, you chose to belittle, and you chose to turn this into a spectacle. And now, After 40 years of doing interviews, after working with hundreds of journalists and talk show hosts, I can honestly say that this has been the most unpleasant and unprofessional experience of my entire career. With that devastating final statement, Harrison Ford turned and walked away from the panel, leaving Joy Behar sitting alone at the desk, her face a mask of shock and humiliation. The studio remained in stunned silence as one of Hollywood's most respected actors disappeared through the studio doors, never to return. The confrontation that started as a routine celebrity